So on October 17th, 2022, this 39-year-old guy named William Gray basically built himself a fortress.
Right, down in Texas.
Yeah, exactly, in Sweeny, Texas. He's living in this camper on his property, recovering from spinal surgery, and he is just absolutely terrified for his life.
Paralyzed by it, really.
Yeah, just intense paranoia. So he does, exactly what any modern security expert would tell you to do today.
He creates a digital net.
Exactly. He installs surveillance cameras all over the outside of the camper. He sets up, like, multiple redundant cloud backups for all his data. He even sends this final text message to his ex-wife, and he includes a specific police report number in it.
Wow.
Yeah, begging her to protect their kids. So he is actively laying down this undeniable, brightly lit digital breadcrumb trail.
I mean, he's doing everything right on paper.
Right. But then just days later, when William actually vanishes, the police show up and they find absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
Not a single thing. Every last digital crumb was just, well, gone.
It's honestly the ultimate modern paradox, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
I mean, we carry these devices in our pockets all day. We wear them on our wrists, we wire them into our doorbells, and we operate under this incredibly comforting assumption that we are always tethered to the world.
Yeah, that the cloud will save us.
Right. We assume that if we are somehow silenced, our data is going to speak for us. But William Gray's case, it just completely shatters that illusion.
It really does. And welcome, everyone, to a brand new deep dive.
Glad to be here.
And to you, the listener, whether you're, a seasoned true crime aficionado, or if you're just insanely curious about the human condition and, well, the massive flaws in our justice system, you are definitely going to want to settle in for this one.
Yeah, grab a coffee for this.
Definitely. Today's stack of sources is just a fascinating, chilling, and honestly eye-opening collection of case files. We're pulling heavily from Wondery's incredibly detailed The Vanished deep dives, as well as several investigative reports from the Exhibit C network.
Incredible reporting in those sources.
Well, top tier. But our mission today isn't just to, read off a list of missing persons cases. We are actively going to extract the underlying anatomy of a disappearance.
Yeah, we're looking for the hidden mechanisms here.
Yeah.
Because the media, like the evening news or those viral social media posts, they almost always just focus on the initial shock of it all.
Right. The breaking news alert.
Exactly. The breaking news, the helicopter footage of a search party walking through a field. But that's really just the surface noise.
Yeah, the spectacle of it.
Right. The actual real insights into how investigations work, or how massive systems fail ordinary people, and how the truth eventually, sometimes decades later, surfaces, those insights lie in the unseen patterns.
Okay, so let's unpack this William Gray situation because, honestly, it is terrifying.
It really is.
You've got companies like Apple, Google, Amazon. They spend billions of dollars marketing their cloud services as these impenetrable vaults.
Oh, absolutely.
So you're telling me a local perpetrator out in a rural camper in Texas somehow outsmarted enterprise-level cloud security? Like, how is that even physically possible?
Well, it happens because we fundamentally misunderstand how the quote-unquote cloud actually works.
What do you mean?
Like, we picture this magical, untouchable server floating in the sky, but the reality of network architecture is that the cloud is entirely reliant on the physical hardware sitting right there in your living room.
Okay, right.
Think about Williams' cameras. For a camera to send footage up to the cloud, it first has to process the video locally, encode it, and then push it through a local router via an API.
An API.
Yeah, an application programming interface. It's basically the bridge.
Oh, okay, so there's a physical bottleneck right there in the camper.
Exactly. If a perpetrator has physical access to your environment, they don't need to be some master hacker to defeat cloud security.
They just need a pair of wire cutters.
Literally, yes. Just sever the internet connection before the camera finishes its upload handshake. Or if they have access to the local NVR, the network video recorder box inside the camper, they can just rip the physical hard drive right out of the machine.
Oh, wow. So all that cloud security means nothing if they can just unplug the box.
Right. And furthermore, if they simply know the victim's password or, force the victim to unlock their phone with their face or fingerprint, they can just go into the app and delete the cloud footage natively.
Oh, that's chilling.
Yeah, the system just registers it as a legitimate user request and dutifully wipes the data. It doesn't know a crime is happening.
So this whole digital fortress we think we're building is really just like a house with a titanium front door but the windows are made of sugar glass.
That's a great way to put it.
William Gray was physically compromised. He was recovering from back surgery. And, I mean, anyone who has had spinal surgery knows how incredibly debilitating that is.
You're practically immobilized.
Yeah, you're in severe pain. Your mobility is gone. He was intensely paranoid. He was planning a divorce. But he was refusing to leave the property because of his young son.
He was trying to hold his ground.
Right. He knew he was vulnerable. He tried to use technology as a shield, but his physical environment betrayed him.
Yeah.
His wife later claimed he was picked up by this mysterious truck. He leaves his phone behind. And because the physical devices were either left behind or compromised, his entire digital footprint just evaporates.
And see, that highlights a grim reality for modern investigators because we have built this entire investigative framework that relies almost entirely on digital evidence now.
Yeah, cell tower pings, GPS coordinates.
Exactly. IP logs, Ring camera footage. When a perpetrator successfully severs that digital connection, investigators are essentially thrown right back into the 1980s.
Wow. Yeah, they're just flying blind.
They're standing in an empty room with absolutely no data.
But, I mean, it's not always the perpetrator who wins that digital chess match, right? Because sometimes the technology functions exactly as it's supposed to, and it catches the killer completely off guard.
Oh, absolutely. That is the flip side of the coin, and it really requires the perpetrator to just be totally ignorant of the technology they are dealing with.
Right, they don't know what they don't know.
A perfect example from our sources is the 2015 murder of 39-year-old Connie DeBate. This was covered extensively by the True Crime All the Time podcast.
Oh, the Fitbit case. Yeah, this is one of the most cinematic, baffling, staged crime scenes I've ever read about.
It's wild. So, Richard DeBate, Connie's husband, spins this incredibly elaborate narrative for the Connecticut police.
A completely fabricated story.
Right. He claims that 2 days before Christmas, this hulking, masked intruder broke into their home. And according to Richard, this phantom intruder shot Connie and then, for some totally inexplicable reason, decided to just leave Richard alive.
Which makes zero sense.
None. He claimed the guy just zip-tied him to a metal folding chair and gave him these superficial, minor wounds. He even told the cops the intruder had a voice like Vin Diesel.
A voice like Vin Diesel. I mean, it literally sounds like a bad movie script.
He really does.
But, you know, if you are a patrol officer walking into that house, you have a dead woman, you have a bleeding husband tied to a chair,
Yeah.
and there are obvious signs of a struggle.
Right, you have to treat it as a real home invasion initially.
Yeah. Without digital evidence, you'd have to spend weeks, maybe months, trying to track down this hypothetical Vin Diesel intruder.
Exactly.
You're pulling highway camera footage, you're interviewing neighbors about strange vehicles, just wasting thousands of man-hours.
But Richard fundamentally misunderstood the wearable technology that Connie had right on her wrist.
Her Fitbit.
Yes, she's wearing a Fitbit. And, you know, a Fitbit isn't just a simple pedometer anymore. It is a highly sophisticated suite of biometric sensors.
What exactly is it tracking?
Well, it utilizes a 3-axis accelerometer to measure movement in 3-dimensional space. And it uses photoplethysmography.
Wait, photo not?
Photoplethysmography.
Yeah.
It's that little flashing green light on the back of the watch.
Oh. Yeah, I always wondered how that worked.
Yeah, it illuminates the capillaries in your wrist and actually measures the expansion and contraction of your blood vessels to determine your exact heart rate.
That is insane. So while Richard is sitting there in the interrogation room, confidently giving the police this highly specific timeline of when this intruder supposedly killed his wife,
Right.
the data on her wrist is just quietly syncing to her phone the whole time.
Precisely. Investigators pulled the data logs. Now, Richard claimed the murder happened around 9:05 a.m.
Okay.
But Connie's Fitbit definitively proved she was walking around the house with her heart rate registering at a totally normal resting pace until after 10:00 a.m.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The device captured her exact movements. She walked 12,217 steps after the time Richard claimed she was already dead.
Wow. So the microscopic biometric data absolutely demolished his macro-level lie.
Completely demolished it. It proved his story was a total fabrication, and he was eventually convicted of her murder.
So if a perpetrator is tech-ignorant like Richard DeBate, the digital trail solves the case pretty neatly.
Usually, yes.
But if a perpetrator is calculating, or if the digital footprint is simply wiped clean like we saw in William Gray's case, what do investigators actually do?
They have to pivot.
Right. If the digital world goes completely dark, they have to pivot entirely to the analog world. They have to look at human habit.
Yes.
because while you can easily delete an MP4 video file from a server, it is vastly harder to erase the psychological and physical routines of a human being.
That pivot from digital to analog is where these investigations become truly complex. I mean, every human being establishes a baseline of normal behavior. We all have
Sure, we
routines.
all have our morning coffee, our commute.
Exactly. But for some individuals, routine isn't just a preference. It is the absolute structural foundation of their reality. And when those deeply ingrained routines are inexplicably broken, it acts as a massive, glaring siren for investigators.
Okay, let's look at the March 2025 disappearance of 21-year-old Jonathan Hoang in Arlington, Washington.
This is a profound
It
case.
really is. It's a profound study in the vulnerability of routine. Jonathan was on the autism spectrum. He was enrolled in a transitional program for young adults to help build independent living skills.
Yeah.
And the sources point out a very specific, crucial detail about his daily life, his jacket.
Yes. Jonathan's family noted that he walked the exact same path through his neighborhood every single day.
Without fail.
Right. And crucially, he wore the exact same hooded jacket every single day, regardless of the weather. Rain, shine, freezing cold, or sweltering heat, he had that jacket on.
Why is that so significant from a psychological standpoint? I think people who aren't neurodivergent might just look at that and say, oh, he just really liked that coat. Teenagers do that.
Sure, people might dismiss it.
But it's much deeper than that, isn't it?
It is vastly deeper. For many individuals on the autism spectrum, the world is just this chaotic, overwhelmingly unpredictable sensory environment.
It's just too much input.
Exactly. Lights are too bright, sounds are too loud, social interactions are layered with all these unwritten, confusing rules. So to navigate that chaos, the brain relies on extreme predictability.
It's a coping mechanism.
It's a mechanism for sensory regulation. A familiar, weighted, or textured item like Jonathan's specific hooded jacket acts as a tactile anchor.
A tactile anchor. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, it provides a constant, predictable sensory input that actually helps regulate the nervous system. To leave the house without it wouldn't just be a simple oversight. It would be like stepping into a hurricane without a tether.
Wow. Okay, so cut to the night of Sunday, March 30th. Jonathan does something slightly odd, but, not immediately terrifying to his family at the time.
Right, it seemed benign.
He tells his dad that the sound of the treadmill upstairs is bothering him, so he asks to sleep in the downstairs guest room instead.
A slight deviation.
Yeah. Later, he says he isn't feeling well and wants to stay home from school the next day. His dad just says, okay, let's see how you feel in the morning.
Pretty standard parenting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when his mom goes to wake him up on Monday morning, Jonathan is gone.
Vanished.
And here is the detail that just makes the blood run cold. He left behind his phone, which is highly unusual for literally anyone his age, and he left behind his beloved hooded jacket.
The anchor.
Yes, he only took an iPad and his earbuds.
So when an investigator looks at that specific deviation from the baseline, they aren't just seeing a missing person, they're seeing a severe psychological fracture.
Because of the jacket.
Right. For a neurotypical 21-year-old, leaving a jacket behind on a nice spring day means absolutely nothing.
You'd just assume they got warm.
Exactly. But for Jonathan, abandoning his primary mechanism for sensory comfort indicates a massive disruption of his internal world.
It means something is terribly wrong.
It suggests he was either in a state of extreme distress, perhaps lured out by someone he trusted through that iPad, or he was removed from the home by force before he could even grab his anchors.
Yeah, I want to compare Jonathan's deeply internal sensory routine with the external, almost industrial routine of our next case.
Dan Davis.
Yes, let's talk about 59-year-old Dan Davis, who disappeared just before Thanksgiving in November 2025 from Marionette Park, Illinois.
This one is so baffling.
Dan was the absolute definition of flawless mechanical reliability. He worked at this famous, bustling music venue called 115 Bourbon Street.
Right.
His coworkers stated on the record that they could not remember him missing a single day of work in decades, not one day.
Just think about the sheer statistical improbability of that.
It's impossible.
20 years without a sick day, without a flat tire that made him stay home, without a family emergency. Dan's baseline was absolute unbroken consistency. He was practically a fixture in that environment.
But on the night of November 24th, a physical trauma violently disrupts that baseline. Dan is involved in a car crash.
A significant catalyst.
Yeah. He survives the crash, gets dropped off at his workplace, greets his coworkers, seemingly continuing his normal routine. But then, in the early morning hours of November 25th, He does the unthinkable.
But walks out.
He just walks away from 115 Bourbon Street. He abandons his post.
The mechanics of a car crash are crucial to understand here.
Because of the head injury.
Yes. When you are in a collision, the sudden deceleration transfers immense kinetic energy directly to your body. Even if you don't break a single bone, your brain, which is essentially just suspended in fluid inside your skull, slams violently against the hard bone.
Right.
This is a coup-contre-coup injury, commonly resulting in a traumatic brain injury, or TBI.
And a TBI can completely alter a personality in an instant, right?
Absolutely it can. The frontal lobe, which governs your executive function, decision-making, and your adherence to routine, is highly susceptible to this kind of trauma.
So he wasn't thinking straight at all.
A severe concussion can induce a fugue state. It's a temporary loss of identity or a profound state of confusion where the brain simply misfires. The person might just wander off, driven by these fragmented impulses rather than logic or routine.
Which perfectly explains the bizarre aftermath. Because when his loved ones and the Chicago police finally enter Dan's apartment, they find incredibly out-of-character items left out.
It didn't look like his apartment anymore.
No. It's as if a stranger had been living there, or Dan's mind was suddenly operating on a completely alien frequency. The final sighting of him is on surveillance footage the next evening, November 26th, showing him exiting a church in a neighboring town, Blue Island.
And then nothing.
And then he vanishes without a trace.
We really have to synthesize these behavioral clues. Jonathan's broken routine points toward a psychological manipulation or extreme internal distress causing him to abandon his comfort items.
Right.
Dan's broken routine, on the other hand, points directly to physiological trauma. The car crash acted as a catalyst, physically disrupting the neural pathways that had maintained a 20-year habit.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Think about personal routines, like the gravitational pull of a planet.
Okay, I like this.
A planet doesn't just decide to leave its orbit on a random Tuesday.
No, the physics literally don't allow it.
Right. It takes an immense unseen force, like a rogue asteroid or a massive gravitational disruption, to knock that planet off its path.
Yeah.
So when highly routine-bound people like Jonathan or Dan vanish without their anchor items, a safety jacket, a perfect attendance record spanning decades, it signals an extraordinary intervention. It means the force that pulled them away was more powerful than the gravity of their entire lives.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. And when those planetary orbits break, when a loved one suddenly drops out of the sky, the families are left in a state of absolute freefall.
Utter panic.
Their immediate, desperate reaction is to turn to the authorities. They dial 911, they file the missing persons report, and they expect the system to cast a massive safety net to catch their loved one.
Because that's what we're told happens. You expect the helicopters, you expect the tracking dogs, you expect a room full of detectives drawing connections on a whiteboard with red string.
Like in the movies.
Yeah. But as our sources reveal in excruciating, infuriating detail, that safety net is often a complete illusion. It is riddled with gaping, systemic holes.
That's tragic.
Sometimes the tragedy isn't just that someone vanished, it's that the massive system designed to find them literally didn't even look.
We are moving into the realm of systemic failure now, and the case of 23-year-old Travis Roberson is a masterclass in how bureaucracy can just swallow a human life whole.
This case made me so angry.
In February 2006, Travis lived in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. He traveled to downtown Fayetteville with friends for a Mardi Gras celebration.
Okay.
Now, this is a crowded, chaotic environment. At some point, he tells his friends he isn't feeling well and is going to walk back to the car to wait for them. He's never seen again.
So his family panics, and they do everything by the book. They go to their local police department in Siloam Springs, and they file a report.
Which is what you're supposed to do.
Right. But because Travis was last seen in Fayetteville, the case technically crossed county lines. So Siloam Springs PD transfers the case to Fayetteville PD.
Or so they thought.
Except, yeah, they didn't. Or Fayetteville didn't process it.
Yeah.
The sources clinically describe this as a, quote-unquote, breakdown in communication.
A catastrophic breakdown.
The result, absolutely no active investigation was opened. None. For years. Siloam Springs thought Fayetteville was handling it, and Fayetteville thought Siloam Springs had it.
To understand how a failure of this magnitude happens, we have to look at the architecture of law enforcement databases and dispatch protocols.
How does a file just disappear?
In the United States, police departments use CAD computer-aided dispatch systems, and they enter missing persons into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center database.
Okay, so it should be centralized.
You'd think so, but these systems are not universally integrated. A local department in one county might use a completely different software vendor than a department 20 miles away.
Oh, man.
Yeah. If a transfer isn't handled with direct human-to-human confirmation, like if an officer just sends a digital teletype and assumes it was received and assigned to a detective, it can easily fall into a digital abyss.
It's maddening. Think of police jurisdictions not as overlapping safety nets, but as separate radio frequencies.
That's exactly what it is.
If Fayetteville PD is broadcasting on FM and Siloam Springs is listening on AM, the silence isn't necessarily a lack of caring, it's a structural failure of the hardware itself. But the real casualty here is time.
Exactly. In missing persons investigations, the first 48 hours are critical. That isn't just a television trope. It's based on the actual decay rate of evidence.
Wait.
Physical evidence at a chaotic site like a Mardi Gras parade, footprints, discarded items, biological traces, is washed away or trampled almost immediately.
People go home.
Witnesses forget faces or they leave town. Security camera footage on local businesses is often on a 24-hour or 7-day loop before it just overwrites itself. By the time this administrative error was discovered years later, the evidentiary window wasn't just closed, it was bricked over.
This brings up something we really need to address, which the sources touch on. The CSI effect.
Oh, yes. This is a huge factor.
Because Travis Roberson's family assumed a massive investigation was happening behind closed doors simply because that's what we are conditioned to believe.
The CSI effect is a well-documented phenomenon where the general public, conditioned by, decades of procedural television shows, believes that forensic science is instantaneous and infallible.
Right.
We imagine that the moment a report is filed, a dedicated task force is assembled, technicians are dusting for prints with laser precision, and a hacker on a computer is magically triangulating a cell phone in real time with satellite imagery.
But the reality is that real-time cell phone tracking usually requires a judge to sign an exigent circumstances warrant or a subpoena, which takes time, legal justification, and so much administrative labor.
It is not fast.
The CSI effect doesn't just give families false hope, it actively harms real investigations, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It harms investigations on multiple fronts. First, families might unintentionally destroy physical evidence in a home because they assume the police will just use some magical digital tracker to solve the case anyway.
So they clean the room.
Exactly, they tidy up. Second, when cases do go to trial, juries infected by the CSI effect now routinely and wrongly acquit suspects if there isn't pristine smoking gun DNA evidence.
Because they expect it on a silver platter.
Right. They fail to understand that in most real-world crimes, DNA is either degraded, mixed, or absent entirely. The expectation gap between television and reality is just a massive chasm.
And bureaucratic bungling, like we saw in Travis's case, is really only one type of systemic failure. There's the much darker, more insidious crack in the foundation, and that is the issue of implicit bias.
Yes, systemic bias.
Specifically, how the system determines who is considered vulnerable enough to warrant immediate police resources. We see this tragically illustrated in the March 2020 disappearance of Keontae Davis in Baltimore.
Keontae's case is just heartbreaking. He was 21 years old, a young adult living with disabilities who required ongoing support and intervention.
He wasn't fully independent.
No. He worked at an adult daycare center, he loved his routine, and he stayed in constant daily contact with his mother, Angie. But Keontae had confided in Angie that his roommates were financially exploiting him.
This is so messed up.
They were taking his money and essentially commandeering his disability benefits.
Financial exploitation of disabled adults is a massive, highly underreported crime.
It really is.
Predators identify individuals who receive guaranteed government checks, but might lack the executive function or legal protection to manage their own finances, and they essentially hold them hostage economically.
Yes.
So when Keontae failed to show up for a birthday cake his mother had specifically baked for him, Angie knew instantly that her son was in grave danger. She went straight to the Baltimore Police Department.
And the response she received highlights a massive legal and procedural blind spot.
What did they say?
The police initially turned her away. They relied on the standard bureaucratic defense used across the country. He is a legal adult, and adults have the right to go missing. They do not have to stay in contact with their families if they choose not to.
Wait, I have to stop you there because
Okay.
I understand that an able-bodied, neurotypical 30-year-old can decide to just pack a bag and move to Alaska without telling their parents.
Sure.
But Kianta had a documented disability. He was actively being exploited. How does a police department in a major American city in the year 2020 look at a mother in that exact situation and just shrug? Like, what is the legal threshold here?
The threshold is incredibly murky, and honestly, it often comes down to the subjective judgment of the intake officer sitting at the front desk.
Wow.
To override the adults can walk away rule, an officer has to classify the person as an endangered adult. But unless there's glaring, immediate physical evidence of blood or a ransom note, many departments default to a passive waiting period.
They want absolute proof.
They demand proof of incompetence or proof of immediate physical harm, which is incredibly difficult for a family to produce in those first chaotic hours. They dismiss the nuanced reality of cognitive vulnerabilities and financial abuse simply because it doesn't fit neatly into a checkbox on a standard police report.
Imagine knowing in your bones that your child is in danger, and the system designed to protect them essentially tells you it's not their problem.
It creates a horrific vacuum.
It does. Angie Davis couldn't just sit at home waiting for a detective to care. She had to hit the streets herself. She was out there knocking on doors, asking questions, basically becoming her own private investigator.
And when systems fail, when authorities drop the ball or dismiss a family's concerns, that void of official information doesn't just stay empty.
Right.
It is immediately filled. It is filled by the agonizing, exhausting labor of the families. And even worse, it is filled by the toxic, unchecked spread of public speculation.
Which brings us to a phenomenon that I find to be probably the most psychologically devastating part of modern disappearances.
The digital ghosts.
Yes. When a person vanishes today, they rarely leave a clean silence behind. Remember earlier when we talked about the digital trail?
Right.
Well, sometimes that technology creates echoes. It creates digital ghosts that actively torture the family. Let's look at the March 2020 case of 35-year-old Michael Terrell Green from Winfield, Louisiana.
Michael's initial disappearance didn't immediately trigger a massive search because, well, his baseline behavior allowed for him to come and go for short periods.
Okay.
But as the days stretched out into an abnormal absence, his sister grew really panicked. She started messaging him on Facebook Messenger. And here is where the psychological horror truly begins.
Oh, let's detail.
She opened the app, and she could see his account was active. That little green dot next to his profile picture was illuminated.
It's a tangible glowing sign that says, I am here, I am interacting with this device.
Exactly. To the human brain, that green dot is proof of life. His sister is sending messages saying their mother is worried sick, begging him to just respond and say he's okay.
And he's getting them.
The messages are being delivered. The dot stays green. He doesn't reply. And then suddenly, right in front of her eyes, the account is completely deactivated.
He's erased digitally, mirroring his physical disappearance.
Yes. And because the Winfield Police Department didn't have immediate, concrete answers, the small-town rumor mill went into absolute overdrive.
It always does.
The family was flooded with horrifying, unverified stories about what happened to him, all while wrestling with what that green dot meant. Was he ignoring them? Was someone else reading the messages?
To understand the cruelty of the digital ghost, we have to look at the technical mechanics of how apps like Facebook actually maintain session tokens.
Because it's not always a person.
Right. That green dot does not necessarily mean a human finger is actively touching a screen. Modern smartphones utilize background app refresh and persistent TCP/IP handshakes with servers to push notifications.
Okay, so it's automated.
Yeah, if Michael's phone was lying in a ditch somewhere, but it still had battery and a cell signal, the app could periodically ping the Facebook server all by itself, keeping that dot green.
So the data is lying. It's just an automated reflex of the hardware, not a human action.
That's one possibility. The other, far more sinister possibility is that a perpetrator had Michael's phone or knew his password and was actively logging into his account to monitor the family's messages.
Oh, wow.
They were reading the sister's frantic pleas to gauge how close the police were getting, and once they felt the heat, they deactivated the account to sever the trail.
That is deeply unsettling.
In the analog era, when someone disappeared, the absence was a physical, immediate void. Today, perpetrators, or the automated systems themselves, use asynchronous communication to severely manipulate timelines and confuse everyone involved.
We see this asynchronous manipulation perfectly illustrated in another case from our sources, the 2016 disappearance of 44-year-old Amy McHale from South Philadelphia.
The timeline here is utterly maddening.
It really is. Amy supposedly left her home on June 13th, but in the early morning hours of June 14th, she called her daughter Amanda and left a voicemail.
And the tone of the voicemail is critical here. She sounded completely fine. She wasn't panicked at all. She claimed she was staying at her ex-husband's house, which, while notable, wasn't an immediate cause for a 911 call.
No, it seems somewhat normal.
But when Amanda tried to call her mother back later that same morning, the phone went straight to voicemail. The device was off the network.
And when the police finally get involved and question the ex-husband, the timeline completely fractures.
What does he say?
The ex-husband claims that Amy was indeed at his home when he went to sleep on the night of the 13th. But he says when he woke up on the morning of the 14th, she was already gone.
So you have a voicemail delivered to a daughter at a time when the primary witness claims she was already missing, or at the very least in transit to parts unknown.
Right. It completely muddies the waters.
How does that happen technically? Because if I pick up my phone and leave a voicemail right now, it stamps the exact time I made the call.
Well, not always. This is where the network architecture of cellular providers creates those digital ghosts we were talking about.
Okay, explain that.
When you make a call that goes to voicemail, your phone transmits voice data to a cell tower, which routes it to a central voicemail server managed by the carrier.
Right.
If there is network congestion, if a tower is undergoing maintenance, or if the receiving phone is briefly out of a coverage zone, that audio file can literally just sit in a digital queue.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it might be delivered and time-stamped hours after the human being actually spoke the words.
Oh my gosh.
Ooh.
So Amy could have made that call the night before while she was totally safe, but the daughter receives it the next morning, making the police think Amy was alive and well at 8 a.m., shifting their entire search window.
Exactly.
Or, conversely, someone forced her to make that recording under duress to buy themselves time.
Exactly. Think about the massive psychological toll this takes on the families. It creates a state of what we call ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss.
Yeah. There is no body to mourn, but there is also no definitive proof of life. Only these haunting digital echoes. A delayed, cheerful voicemail that violently clashes with the grim reality. A deactivated social media profile. The data insists the person is still interacting with the world, keeping the wound violently open. It prevents any sort of closure.
It's essentially a modern haunting. You wake up every single day wondering if your phone will ring, if a green dot will suddenly reappear on a screen, or if a detective will finally knock on your door.
It's agonizing.
That open wound can last for years. It can last for decades. But as our final stack of sources proves, that agonizing silence doesn't always last forever.
It doesn't. And when the silence finally breaks, the outcomes can be absolutely staggering. We are looking at the long arc of time and how the evolution of science and the sheer endurance of hope can rewrite an ending decades later.
Let's look at the 1988 disappearance of Joan Bernal from Joliet, Illinois.
Yes.
For 37 years, the narrative of Joan's disappearance was entirely controlled by one single person, her husband, Gil.
In December 1988, Gil claimed they were driving together to Texas for the holidays. According to his official statement, they got into a massive heated argument during the drive, and he dropped her off at a bus stop in McAllister, Oklahoma. He claimed he gave her some cash to buy a ticket back to Illinois, drove away, and never saw her again.
It is the ultimate textbook alibi.
Hmm.
We fought, she walked away, I have no idea where she is.
Convenient, isn't it?
Very. And without digital evidence, remember this is 1988, there are no cell phones to track, no ubiquitous ATM cameras to pull. Investigators had absolutely nothing but his word.
Right.
For 37 years, that story sat like a stone. The family had to wrestle with the agonizing possibility. Did she just start a new life and choose not to contact them? Or did she meet foul play on the side of a highway?
37 years of absolute limbo.
And then the system finally moves.
Yes. In December 2025, an unbelievable update hits the news. A Will County grand jury returns a sealed indictment charging Gilbert Bernal with first-degree murder.
Crazy.
Nearly 4 decades later, the arc of justice finally catches up to him.
But how does that actually happen? How does a case go from a cold, stagnant file gathering dust in a basement to a grand jury indictment 37 years after the fact?
It speaks to the relentless, exponential evolution of investigative techniques. While the sources on the Bernal case note that the specific details of the new evidence remain sealed, which, standard procedure before a trial to protect the integrity of the prosecution, we can look at the mechanics of parallel cases to understand how the impossible becomes possible.
Right. The sources specifically mentioned the Louisa Dunn case from the UK to illustrate this massive scientific leap.
Yes, Louisa Dunn was a 75-year-old woman murdered in Bristol in 1967. That case was unsolved for an astonishing 58 years.
Wow.
But the physical evidence, biological material left at the scene was preserved. For decades, police had the killer's DNA. But standard DNA profiling, which looks at specific markers called short tandem repeats or STRs, only works if the killer's exact profile is already in a criminal database like CODIS.
Right. If he has no prior record, there's no match.
Exactly. If the killer was never arrested for another crime, the DNA is just a meaningless string of code.
But the science shifted.
Dramatically. The advent of forensic genetic genealogy, or FGG, just changed the world.
That's the 23andMe stuff, right?
Basically, yes. Instead of looking at 13 or 20 STR markers, scientists can now extract single nucleotide polymorphisms, SNPs. They look at hundreds of thousands of genetic markers to build a comprehensive genealogical profile.
So they don't need a direct match.
Right. They take the killer's DNA from 1967, upload it to public genealogy databases where everyday people have submitted their DNA to find distant cousins, and they build a family tree backward.
That is brilliant.
They find a second cousin, trace the lineage down to a specific set of brothers living in the area at the time of the murder, and suddenly they have a name.
And that's exactly what happened in Bristol. Advancements in forensic genetic genealogy allowed authorities to finally identify the killer, a 92-year-old man.
Yes.
The science literally outweighed him. The DNA molecule, properly preserved, has a half-life that outlasts human memory and the lifespans of the original detectives.
That is the power of the grand jury in cases like Joan Bernal's. A prosecutor can take this newly unlocked scientific evidence, or maybe a newly discovered witness who finally feels safe enough to speak 30 years later, and present it in secret to a grand jury.
And the grand jury decides.
The grand jury's only job is to determine if there is probable cause that a crime was committed. When they say yes, the sealed indictment is handed down, and a 37-year-old alibi collapses overnight.
Science brings justice. But sometimes, as our sources reveal, the universe just bypasses the science entirely and delivers an absolute miracle.
Yes, the Michelle Hunley-Smith case.
Now, I want to talk about this. December 9, 2001. Stoneville, North Carolina.
The details of this case are so ordinary, which is what makes the mystery so profound. Michelle is 38 years old, a mother of 3. She tells her family she is heading out to do some Christmas shopping. She gets into her green 1995 Pontiac Trans sport van, and the sources note it had an incredibly specific, memorable license plate, ROKN on N.
That's a great detail to have for a search.
It is. She heads toward Martinsville, Virginia.
It's a Sunday. By midnight, she hasn't returned. Her husband wakes their teenage daughter, panic sets in, they call the police, and Michelle completely vanishes.
Just gone.
For 24 years, her case is an absolute void. There is no trace of her. The green Pontiac van is never found. Her daughters grow up, graduate, live their entire adult lives with this gaping hole in their family.
24 years of ambiguous loss.
And then comes the twist that literally made me drop my notes when I read the source file.
I was shocked too.
In February 2026, 24 years after she drove away in that van to go Christmas shopping, the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office calls a press conference and announces that Michelle has been located.
Incredible.
And they haven't found her remains in a submerged vehicle. They haven't found a cold case suspect. Michelle is located alive.
It is the rarest, most staggering outcome in the entire realm of missing persons investigations.
It really is.
It challenges everything we assume about the modern grid. Think about the mechanics of existing in the 21st century. How does a human being stay hidden or remain disconnected from their past identity for a quarter of a century?
Right, because if you apply for a job, you need a social security number.
Exactly.
If you rent an apartment, they run a credit check. If you get pulled over for a broken taillight, your name goes into a database.
Yeah.
To survive for 24 years without triggering a single algorithmic alarm, how is that even done?
It requires existing entirely in the shadow economy.
Meaning off the grid.
Right. It means dealing strictly in cash, utilizing burner identities, or perhaps living in an off-grid community. While the specific circumstances of Michelle's recovery are fiercely protected by law enforcement for her privacy.
Which makes sense.
Absolutely. We do not know if she fled an abusive situation, suffered a profound dissociative amnesia, or was held against her will, but her survival proves a fundamental truth
Which is what me.
that a cold case is never truly closed until there is a definitive physical answer. Law enforcement and the public often fall into the trap of assuming that a long absence equates to death.
We just write them off.
We do. But Michelle's case forces us to acknowledge that the human capacity for survival and the ability to slip through the cracks of massive bureaucratic systems is far greater than we realize.
It's the duality of these outcomes that I find so incredibly moving. Every single cold case file sitting in a cardboard box in a police precinct basement is essentially a suspended state of potential energy.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you. It could end in a tense courtroom 37 years later with a husband finally facing a judge because the DNA science caught up to his lies.
Yeah.
Or it could end with an impossible phone call to a daughter, telling her that the mother who vanished when she was a teenager is alive and breathing 24 years later.
And we really must recognize the immense psychological endurance required from the families. They have to live inside that suspended state of potential energy every single day of their lives.
It has to be exhausting.
It is. They have to balance the grim, terrifying realities of statistical probability with the enduring, stubborn flame of hope. They fight the system, they fight the digital ghosts, and they refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's just take a breath and recap the sheer scope of what we've unpacked here.
It's been a lot.
We started by dismantling the illusion of our digital flickresses, looking at William Gray and Connie debate.
Right.
We saw how easily a meticulously planned digital trail could be erased by physical intervention, or how microscopic data from a Fitbit can destroy a masterfully staged lie.
We then pivoted to the analog world, examining the profound vulnerability of human habits. We saw how a shattered routine, whether it's Jonathan Hahn leaving behind a crucial sensory comfort item or Dan Davis walking away from a flawless 20-year work record due to physiological trauma.
The TBI.
Right, how that acts as a glaring siren that an immense force has disrupted their orbit.
We waded through the frustrating, terrifying realities of the justice system. The jurisdictional black holes where agencies like Fayetteville and Siloam Springs literally failed to communicate, letting crucial 48-hour windows just slam shut.
The CSI effect playing a huge role there, too.
Definitely. We looked at the systemic biases that dismiss the disappearances of vulnerable, disabled adults like Kianta. We broke down the haunting nature of digital ghosts, those active green dots and delayed voicemails born of network architecture that torture families and fuel rumors.
And finally, we looked at the long game. The incredible advancements in forensic genetic genealogy that can indict a killer nearly 4 decades later, and the absolute miracles of survival that remind us why families never, ever stop looking.
Yeah.
Because behind every true crime headline, behind every deep dive summary, is a complex, fragile web of human behavior, systemic flaws, and enduring hope.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about the digital breadcrumbs you left just since you woke up this morning.
There's probably a lot of them.
Oh, tons. The text you sent, the route your GPS tracked, the Wi-Fi networks your phone automatically pinged. You followed a routine today without even consciously thinking about it.
We all do.
If you were to step out of that routine tomorrow, what story would your data tell the people trying to find you? Would it tell the truth? And more importantly, as we saw with the digital ghosts and the manipulated timelines, who are the people in your physical life who know your heart, your habits, and your mind well enough to realize when the data is lying?
That's a chilling question.
Until next time, keep your eyes open and take care of each other.